Connecticut didn't bother to exonerate victims of witch trials until last year. What happened that made them suddenly decide to address this?
If I had a time machine, I would travel back to Hartford in the 1600s to help the people who are being accused of witchcraft.
I can't believe we're entertaining this.
It's not magical or mystical to me. It's suffering. It's true suffering. These people were innocent. They were not witches. They were scapegoated.
The House of Representatives is voting by roll.
It was one of the oldest documented parts of our state's history, and also one of the darkest.
The witch trials in Connecticut were extremely deadly. The first 7 people who were accused and then indicted were convicted and subsequently hanged. 7 for 7.
Dating back to the 1600s, Connecticut's witch trials occurred more than 4 decades before those in Salem, Massachusetts.
Salem was the tail end. It was the grand finale of the witch trials. Everything that led up to it started in Connecticut.
Of the accused, 34 people were indicted and 11 were ultimately executed for witchcraft.
It's been kind of on the down low in Connecticut.
Author and researcher Beth Caruso lives in Windsor, where the first documented hanging victim was from.
I learned about Alice Young through a neighbor. Not a lot was known about her. It drove me crazy and I wanted to learn more.
She combed through property records, birth and death certificates, piecing together what happened to Young. She found that in 1647, there was an influenza epidemic in town.
She was probably accused because of this epidemic and this huge cluster of deaths right next door to her, where 4 children died and her 1 child survived.
Young was accused of being a witch, and Caruso says she was hanged in Hartford.
We're not sure exactly where. Some people speculate it was near the old State House. The witch trials really did start with Alice in their most gruesome forms. There were some witch trials in the colonies before Alice Young, but they never led to a hanging. It was her case that really opened the floodgates of this injustice.
After Young came a second woman accused in Windsor.
Lydia Gilbert, which is a strange case. She was accused of doing witchcraft on a gun that somebody else had misfired that led to a death. It makes Alice and Lydia part of the Windsor family again.
Caruso and others pushed to have both women honored by the town of Windsor. And today, the Justice Room at Town Hall is dedicated to them, and their names are honored alongside others in a memorial in the center of town. But their stories were just the beginning. People were accused of being witches all across the state, from Greater Hartford.
There were also some from Wethersfield, from Farmington,
down to southern Connecticut.
Goody Bassett and Goody Knapp, who were in the southern regions of Connecticut, they were hanged in that area.
During the Hartford witchcraft panic of 1662 to 1663, 11 people were accused of witchcraft and 4 were executed.
Connecticut's colonial laws listed witchcraft as a capital crime.
The definition of a witch back then was very different than what a modern person might think of. What these people were accused of were aligning with Satan to do real harm to their communities.
And it all happened during an unsettled time in history.
John Winthrop Jr., the governor of Connecticut, was across the sea in England, obtaining a charter which would unite the New Haven and Connecticut colonies. It was a time that stirred up a lot of feelings of anxiety. What would happen? Would the king take it away?
Governor John Winthrop Jr. aimed to ease the panic by putting more parameters around the witch trials. Caruso says making it so 2 people had to step forward as witnesses to the witchcraft.
He didn't believe that they could actually do the things that they were accused of, such as changing the weather, making a bridge go out, causing a pandemic. It just didn't make sense to him. So he started to argue against these cases. We're lucky we had John Winthrop Jr., or it would have gotten much worse in Connecticut.
Over 300 years later, the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project formed to right these wrongs, bringing in State Rep Jane Garibay and drafting a resolution.
For these families, it is very serious. I kept hearing from people all over the country, even from England and Scotland, and people who were descendants, and there was one from Pennsylvania, and she said, what do I tell my daughter and granddaughter about their 9th generation grandmother, that, you know, what happened to her?
Senator Saud Anwar came on board on the Senate side, and even with some opposition,
There have got to be 500 bills ready to be debated. I'm sorry, with all due respect, they're more important than this.
The resolution as amended is passed.
It passed 33-1 in the Senate and 121-30 in the House. Advocates say there's more to be done, like keeping this history alive. In August, the first ever Connecticut Witch Trials Festival was held on Pratt Street to do just that.
These people were put to death for just being different. That's why we wanted to have the festival. We wanted to bring more knowledge for people, because when you say, hey, did you hear about the Connecticut? Nobody knows, but you say Salem, everybody knows.
During the season when witches are top of mind, also keeping in mind the history of what can happen when things get out of hand.
It's not so much that history repeats itself, it's that human nature responds to crises in very similar ways. And in times of crisis, it's natural to turn to the underdogs in society, the people easy to scapegoat.
And in present day, we see certain groups, immigrants, being scapegoated, lies being told about them, with actual harmful consequences.
And I think we always learn a lesson from what happens. The witchcraft trials in Connecticut and elsewhere targeted the poor, they targeted women, not exclusively, but mostly. They focused on evidence that was very speculative, if not actually spectral, and evidence that today would, of course, no longer be accepted in a court of law.